everyone, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to Raising A to Z, this YouTube channel all about homeschooling. My name is Amanda. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and all this month I am doing a whole series on reading and literacy and how to help you out with reading, because reading is definitely one of those things that people get really panicky about, whether your kids are public school or homeschooled. And I thought, as my experience as a teacher and as a homeschool parent, what are my best tips for encouraging reading and helping people get their kids to read? I thought today that I would give you kind of my top 10 tips when it comes to encouraging reading and also for encouraging a reluctant reader. I know a lot of parents who are really concerned when they have kids who just don't want to read, they don't like reading, reading is not their thing. So how can they encourage kids to read, and how do you just get more reading into your day? How do we encourage readers? And so I'm going to talk about that today. But before I do, why don't you go down and subscribe and click the bell so you can get notifications when I put out the next video in this series, because you'll definitely want to do that. It's all about some of my top tips for picking books that are kind of getting your kids from not reading to reading. Let me talk about my favorite tips. I've got 10 tips today on reading, helping a reluctant reader, and some of them are not going to be what you expect. Okay, so hang on. My first tip number 1, read aloud. Read aloud to your kids. Every day, all the time, as much as you can, read aloud to them. So many parents that I see, especially when I was in the school system, stop reading to their kids once their kids kind of have the grasp of reading. And then it becomes like a thing you do by yourself. Oh, it's reading time to go to bed. Okay, you go in your bed and you read by yourself. And that's fine. Some kids enjoy reading by themselves, typically the kids who like reading. But if you have a reluctant reader, don't. Just continue reading with your kids. Sit with them, read with them, cuddle in with them, make it a whole family time, make it a relationship time. Let them enjoy not having to do the work of reading, because reading is a lot of work. Especially if you have kids who have any form of neurodiversity, it's a lot of work for them. And so you want to make sure that you're giving them opportunities to hear stories and fall in love with the routine of reading and enjoying stories without having to put in necessarily all the effort that goes with it. Because they're still going to pick up on some of the great aspects of reading, like plot, character development, the morals, the fantasy, the world building. They're going to pick up on all of that without having to do the effort of actually decoding all the words. I honestly believe that parents should be reading aloud to their kids until they're at least 14 years old. Yes, 14. And that is not an exaggeration. That is me being very, very serious. Until your kids are in high school, you probably should be reading aloud to them at least a few times a week, if not every day. That's my first tip. Read aloud with your kids. Tip number 2, read one level ahead. In my next video, I'm going to talk about why I don't like leveled readers, but I generally find a good rule of thumb is to kind of read one level above where your kids are reading when you're doing your read alouds. So if your kids are really comfortable with picture books and reading those on their own, then pick one level ahead. So your next level ahead would be either a bigger, a picture book with lots more words, or it would be a small chapter book with lots of pictures. One step up. One step up from something like that would be, my kids call them black and white books, because that's kind of the next level where they take all the colors out of the books. But it's a chapter book that still has a few pictures, maybe one picture every chapter, but it's short, it's small, but there's still some pictures. Your next level would be no pictures, but really short chapters. And so basically you always want to be reading kind of one level above where your kids are. Another great option or way to kind of gauge what kind of level you could read is going a couple years older with the characters in the book. So if your kids are 8, you might want to read them a book where the characters are 10, 11, 12. So kind of a little bit older than them. It's a great way to kind of pick one book that's a little bit more advanced. That way your kids are hearing bigger words, more difficult grammar, more difficult vocabulary, and you can have those conversations while you're doing all the work to decode that. They're still picking up on all of those things, and it's going to help them translate into better readers at their level. Number 3, this is a hard one for a lot of parents. Read what they want, not what you want, what they want. Sometimes parents pick books that they think would be great for their kids, and sometimes they are great books. I'm not saying they're not great books, it's just not what their kids are into. And so you got to read what your kids want to read. Sometimes that means, especially little ones, reading the same book again and again and again. And I know that drives parents nuts, but hear me out. When children are getting into that routine of reading the same book again and again and again, they're starting to pick up on the repetition of the words. They're starting to pick up on the rhythms. They're picking up on the grammar of it. They're actually starting to follow the words. They're starting to make the connection of what you're reading is what the page is. So when you if you skip a page, they know, because they're starting to make those connections of these words mean this line. This means that line. You're getting memorization. You're starting to pick up sight words. There's so much that happens when you're reading books again and again and again. So if you're reading Pig the Pug, which for the 15th time this week, your kids are learning to read. It's just not that enjoyable for you. The same can be said for parents whose kids like very specific genres. Sometimes we just don't want to read another mystery story, but that's what your kids want. And so right now, especially when your kids are learning to read, you want to foster the love of reading, which sometimes means reading books that are not in your wheelhouse. They're not what you love to read, but if they love to read it, then you got to keep going. You got to keep going. Right now, especially my girls are in love with this like Dragon Girls series. They're in love with it. Great. They're nice books. They're sweet. They're very, they're nice books. Not my cup of tea, but man, oh man, are they obsessed with them. They just want and I've got a 5-year-old who's sitting there and begging me to read chapter books without pictures because she loves the story so much. I'm not going to say no. So I understand. I do understand. I really would rather not read such a predictable book, because every book has similar plots and similar outcomes. They're going to succeed in the end. It is what it is, but they love them. And so I keep reading them and I keep buying them because they're not available in my library. So yeah, I understand. Read what they want to read and you'll thank me in years to come. I promise. My 4th step, visit your library. Visit your library. So many people underutilize their library, especially if their kids are starting to read or are reluctant readers. You need to take them to the library. It needs to become part of your routine. It needs to become part of your schedule, whether you go every 2 weeks, whatever. You need to visit your library and let them get used to being around books. Let them get used to pulling books. Let them get used to picking all kinds of books, because you want them to start feeling comfortable to pull books that are maybe a little bit harder, or pulling books and realizing, hey, that's a little too easy, or it's not really at my level. It's kind of boring. Maybe I should pick something a little more interesting, a little more my level. You want your kids to pick what they want to pick. And the nice thing about the library is there's no stress about it. If you don't read the book, you just take it back in 2 weeks. If it's too hard for you, you're like, yeah, I just really can't get through it, take it back 2 weeks. If it's way too easy and you finished it in 3 minutes and you're like, that was kind of boring and it's done now, you take it back in 2 weeks. It's a very low pressure situation. You're getting your kids used to getting books. They can explore a lot of different books and a lot of different genres. And your library probably has some great ideas on books they carry, series they carry, interlibrary loans. It's a great way to get lots of books into your home without spending a fortune. Our library actually does a thing where on the receipt, when I do I check out a bunch of books, they give you the slip that tells you all the books that you have and whatever. At the bottom, it tells you how much money you save by checking out books. Every month when I do my unit studies, I pulled probably about 15, 20 books. I routinely have a total of between $300 and $500 at the bottom of my receipt. And those are books that come into our house that we read, that we love, and then we send them back, and I didn't have to pay for them. So it's definitely something I think every family should go to the library routinely. And every family, especially if you have a reluctant reader, let them go and pick out what they want. Let them explore books without any pressure. And that leads me into tip number 5. Don't buy your kids books, especially if they're reluctant readers. Hear me out. If your kid is a reluctant reader and you take them into a bookstore and you say, you pick a book and I'll buy it for you, they're going to walk around, they're going to pick a cover that they recognize, or they're going to pick something that kind of sounds good and they're going to take it home. And if they don't like it, we now have a problem. They're now going to feel pressured to read something they don't like. It's maybe too easy, maybe too hard, maybe not something they're interested in because they picked it based off the cover, because maybe it's something that they saw their friends reading, maybe it was in their classroom at school, maybe it's a title they've heard before. They're picking it under the pressure because it's a huge store. They're picking what they feel comfortable and familiar with. And now you have a kid at home who has a book, and now there's a financial pressure on that. So you're going to be like, hey, I bought you this book. You need to read this book. And life doesn't work that way. Kids need to have the freedom to DNF a book. Do not finish. Like, they need that freedom to say, like, I really hate this book. I don't like it. I don't want to read it. And especially if you have a reluctant reader, they might have to DNF some books a whole lot before they find a genre or a series or characters that they really cling to kind of get them hooked into reading. If you're adding that financial pressure on them, that like, I paid $20 for this book, it's adding extra stress that doesn't need to be there. This is also why tip number 4 works so well. You're taking those financial stresses off of kids, and they can DNF as many books as they want. And you have to think of this as adults. We DNF books all the time. A couple years ago, I had Michelle Obama's Becoming book. I DNF'd that. Nothing wrong with it. Great book, I'm sure. I know so many people who loved it. I just couldn't get over the writing style of it. It literally, I just was like 3 chapters in, felt like tearing my hair out. I'm sure it has a great moral, great story, and her life is incredible. I just couldn't get over the writing of the book, and I DNF'd it. As an adult, I have the right to do that. We also need to teach our kids that they have the right to do that. They, especially if they're reading for pleasure, they don't have to read books they don't like. So if your kid is a reluctant reader, do not buy them books. Take them to the library instead. You can buy them books when they have found something that they absolutely love and are begging you for the next one. Okay? Trust me. Tip number 6, audiobooks are your friend. If you have kids who are reluctant readers and you're finding like you need more time you want to do more reading, but you just are struggling with it or whatever, audiobooks are your friend. I know so many people who love a good audiobook, who put audiobooks in for their kids all the time. Audiobooks are such a great way. Basically, it is reading aloud, and reading aloud counts as reading a book. I don't know who needs to hear that, but it does count. It's the exact same equivalent of reading the book yourself is listening to the book. And so the nice thing about audiobooks, you can put them on in so many situations where you might not have an option to read aloud. So for example, you might want to put it on when your kids are in the tub, so they can listen to a book while they're splish splashing playing. You might want to put it on when it's a rainy day and your kids are playing Lego. They're now playing and reading at the same time. A lot of people love to listen to audiobooks in the car, especially if you're doing a road trip, putting on an audiobook that takes, 4 or 5 hours to get through. Great option for kids. Another great option is if you have an audiobook and the physical book, you've basically just created a follow along, read along book. I've done this with Alexi where we've pulled books for her and she has read them and listened to the audiobook, especially if it's like a book that's a little bit too high for her. She loves it. And here's another thing. Sometimes you can find those read aloud books at your library. We found a couple and it's just fantastic. So audiobooks are your friend when it comes to getting more reading into your daily life. Tip number 7, have books everywhere. If you have reluctant readers, if you have kids who are just learning to read, you want to have books scattered throughout your house. I know that's going to drive some neat freaks nuts, because you want to have all your things in one spot. All the books are in this room. All the books are on this shelf. You got to have books everywhere. You got to have books everywhere. You want to have books in any room where your kid is going to be. You want to have books for sitting on the toilet. You want to have books for when they're in the living room. You want to have books in their bedrooms. You're going to want to have books in the car, as long as your kids don't get car sick. Having books around means it is now becoming A, normal to pick up a book, and B, they can basically pick up a book wherever they are. You're basically creating an environment where reading is highly sought after and where reading is highly accessible. And so have books everywhere. We have books in the car. If you go to McDonald's, when you get a Happy Meal, you can actually ask for a book instead of a toy, and they're actually good books. We've gotten some Franklin's, we've gotten some of the Canada books, we've gotten like just really good book series. It's just different books. They're fantastic, and they're about yay big, We just call them our car books now, and we just keep them in the car. And I just ask for, because my kids we get 3 Happy Meals because I only eat a Happy Meal. Fun fact. And so I just ask for like 2 or 3 different books when we go. And often they have at least 2 books. And so it doesn't take long to accumulate a book if you stop at McDonald's every now and then. So over the past kind of 3-4 years, we've actually gotten a little bit of a collection into the car. And it's just like a normal thing for my kids to pick up a book and kind of flip through a book while we're driving. Encouraging reading everywhere we go. Tip number 8, have some reading routines. So you definitely want to not only encourage an environment where reading is happening, you want to set up some habits where reading is happening on a regular basis. So we have certain routines where we are reading. So for example, in the morning when we do our morning basket, we read at least a couple of chapters or 1 or 2 picture books, depending on what we're working on at the time. And my kids are just like used to like, yeah, it's time to read. It's time to read. Yep, here we go. We're going to read. And then we read something different at bedtime. And we sit down, we get in and we read something at bedtime. Like those are like the kind of the normal routines that you want to establish where reading is just part of your day. Reading is just a normal thing that happens in your home. And I always like to pick something, because we do kind of 2 reading times throughout the day, for sure in the morning, for sure before bed. I like to have different things. So like our morning reading is kind of our unit study stuff and what we're really studying in terms of like our academic stuff. And then the evening, sometimes it's a unit study book that's loosely connected. Sometimes it's something totally different. Right now we're working through the Bad Guys series because my kids are obsessed with that one right now. Yeah, a couple chapters. I find having something a little bit bigger at bedtime is really nice because you can read like 2 or 3 chapters like, oh, save the rest for tomorrow. And they're like, oh, Mom, 1 more chapter. That is getting them hooked, right? You want to get them hooked into it. And having those routines really make it just like a normal part of your life. And so it just encourages more practice. It encourages more vocabulary. It's just encouraging to have those things be part of your daily life, which reading is part of your daily life. You might as well just like get it looped in there to begin with, right? Tip number 9, don't gatekeep. Now, I say this with as much respect as I can. There are a lot of parents out there who do not let their kids read certain books for really dumb reasons. And I'm not talking about like there are books where it doesn't agree with your morals or your values, or you just don't really like them. Like for example, I'm not a huge fan of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. I just think they're really whiny books and it's not really something I want to encourage in my home. Yeah, like there are going to be books out there that you don't like for valid reasons, right? But there's also a bunch of families and kids who are not allowed to read books because it's not what their parents deem acceptable books. For example, I cannot tell you how many parents I know who hate graphic novels and will not let their kids read a graphic novel. Will not let the reluctant boy reader with dyslexia read a graphic novel. It drives me nuts. Reading is reading is reading. Your goal as a parent should be to encourage a love of reading, not telling them what is good enough reading and what is not good enough reading. There's different purposes for reading. Sometimes it's for information. Sometimes it's for pleasure. Informational texts, yes, sometimes you need to get a good sourced book where it has the right sources and the right information and like, yeah, you want something decent. But sometimes when you're reading something for fun and for pleasure, it's going to be probably a little bit easier. It's going to be something that's funnier or has more of a hook, something that you're just like, it just sucks you in, a different plot. It's different. Graphic novels do that for a lot of kids, especially kids who are maybe a little bit lower on where their reading level is. I hate that word, but you know what I mean? Because often it has a higher content value with less writing. So kids who are like 9 and 10 and struggling with reading often love graphic novels because they get more interesting stories without all of the effort of reading. So you're getting kids who have less words to read but still get all of the plot, the character development, the morals. You're getting all of the elements that make a story as a whole they're still getting that out of a graphic novel. That is how you hook kids into reading. As they read that, they will pick up other books. Don't keep your kids from reading graphic novels or books that you don't deem appropriate because you don't like them, just because you don't think they're good enough. I promise you, your kid will start, if your kid is hooked on graphic novels, they will read other things eventually. They will. They'll move into other genres because there's just only so many graphic novels. But it's a great option for a lot of kids out there, particularly boys, particularly reluctant readers, particularly those who are struggling with neurodivergencies and just don't know or have a hard time with reading. Graphic novels are an awesome choice. An awesome choice for them. So don't gatekeep books just because it's not what you think is academic enough. Let them read graphic novels. Let them read books that they want to read. You'll thank me. And tip number 10, my last tip, you definitely need to model it. There's a weird statistic out there that something like 80% of college students will never read another book once they graduate from college. And then you wonder why our kids don't read. Our kids don't read because no one around them is reading what they want to read. They read things for work, which most people complain about. They read bills at home, which most people complain about. They read things for information and then gripe about it. Look at all the ingredients in this thing. This thing has too much sugar. And then we wonder why kids don't like reading. So if you want to encourage reading, you need to set up an environment where reading is normal. And that means reading for yourself as well. That doesn't mean you have to pick up big, huge intellectual texts and, read Emily Bronte or whatever, Emily Dickinson. And I don't know why I'm only thinking of Emily names right now, but you know what I mean? You don't have to read big books. You can read, there's lots of great, rom-coms out there and, adventure books and fantasies and mysteries. And there's so many books out there that you can get your hands on. I personally love to read on my Kindle app on my phone. I've been showing my kids and making a point of they're like, hey mom, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm reading a book, look, and showing them how my phone has become my book. So instead of buying a whole bunch of chapter books, I have a Kindle Unlimited account and I'm reading books, right? But I also pick up physical books. I take them to the bookstore and we buy a book and I show myself buying a book. I often like to make a point of getting books for things that I want to learn about. So when I'm planning my garden, I'll check out 5-6 books on gardening and planting gardens and all of that from the library and kind of at least flip through them, look through them, get some ideas, because now I'm encouraging them to look for books for information, right? And so they're watching me look at information that I enjoy, picking up books on a regular basis, reading for enjoyment. And now reading is not just a thing that they have to do because they're kids, right? Reading is something adults do too. And so now it's becoming a generational thing. Those are my tips. I'm going to give you one bonus tip. Here's my bonus. If your kids are struggling with getting through a story, give them something to do. I know some of my parents who really have a hard time with their kids not sitting still. There's no reason why, if you're having a story time or a quiet time, your kids can't have something in their hands. Playing a little bit of Lego, fidget toy, fidget poppers, coloring, doing something kind of calm and seated where they can do something with their hands, where they're not running around, but it's they're building something, they're doing something with their hands, is a great option, especially for kids who have ADHD or something like that. It's a great option for them. They're still hearing the story, they're still absorbing the story, they're still getting all the benefits of reading. It's just now you're giving them something to do with their hands. And busy hands are happy hands. So my bonus tip, if you have kids who just can't sit still, do an activity with them while you're reading. Something seated, something kind of calm, and you might see a huge shift in your reading time. So those are my top tips for reading, the top tips for getting reluctant readers interested in reading, and basically tips for just encouraging a love of reading in general. If you guys have any tips for reading, please put them down below. I'd love to share them. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and click the bell. And if you want to see what we're reading and what reading looks like in our life and how I encourage reading with my kids, you'll definitely want to make sure you follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week.